All right, there we go. So today, again, we're going to be talking about analytics and how it can be done by everyone because of the power of generative AI. And of course, today we're going to be talking more and focusing more on OpenAI. The reason being that there is a newish offering called Advanced Data Analytics. If you've heard of something called Code Interpreter, that is the same thing that we're talking about. This advanced data analytics platform is the new renaming and rebranding of Code Interpreter. So this is part of a series. If you visit the Data Science Institute's website, you'll see all the workshops that we have upcoming, and also you'll be able to access the workshops that we have done before. Previously, we've just been talking about generative AI. So very briefly, we can just go over what that is. In the past, we have talked about things like ChatGPT. We've talked about the different types of generative AI offered by other companies like Bard by Google or Claude by Anthropic. These are all models, and they're deep learning models which are generative. So that means that at their base, at their foundation, what they're trying to do is they're trying to predict the next token or predict the next thing with the highest probability. So based on everything that it's seen, based on the huge data sets of text and other things that it's been trained on, it is learning, okay, when I see the word the, then I think the highest next probability thing is the cat or something like that. So that is their base training. But as we know, they also have a lot of additional training after that, including for instructions. We've all pretty much witnessed now where we're able to tell our ChatGPT or Claude or Bard or what have you, you're able to give it instructions and then it responds to the instructions. And that is a secondary level of training or an additional level of training. And finally, we are settling on the reinforcement learning from human feedback, which is another method on top of the instruction fine tuning that allows the model to pick out of, learn the policy to pick the best response. So now we are going to build on that even further. Again, we're going to start with GPT-4 because we've already talked a good bit about ChatGPT and those predecessors, but we'll go ahead and start with GPT-4. But before we get all the way in, I'd like to start and ask if you have any questions before we get started. All right, great. Well, today then we are again talking about AI analytics and how these generative AI platforms, specifically advanced data analysis by OpenAI, can help you in your work, whether it be your research or maybe if you're able to use OpenAI at your company, how you can make these analytics workflows that are reproducible, they're extensible, and they're verifiable. So what does that mean? When we talk about reproducibility, something that is really nice that we get from this platform is the ability to rerun the code on the same data that we just got. So we know that generative AI is generally able to write code. Now, when we get that code to the output, we can run it ourselves and do the same analysis again, and we can apply it to other data sets. In terms of extensibility, with these models, because they are producing code and they are producing these explanations, that allows us to, one, understand the analysis that's going on, two, look at it, run it, and make sure that it's actually doing what we want it to do. And we can talk a little bit more about that, and we will. But three, if we're pretty familiar already with coding, we can extend the analysis or deepen the analysis in the ways that we see fit, again, because we have the code right there. So today we're going to go over some examples of that. We're just going to walk you through how to use it and also some nice things that come with it. It'll probably be about 45 minutes to leave enough time for questions and experimentation together. But of course, if we end early, we will certainly give you back your time. As always, generative AI is not 100% perfect. It's maybe not even 90% perfect. And that's why we as humans, we have to use a critical eye when we are looking at the responses that it gives us, the outputs that it gives us, and what it's producing. So we are taking nothing here as like the 100% truth. Every time we see something that's coming out of generative AI, we are questioning to ourselves. Now, does that make sense? Does that seem reasonable? If I can run this, let me run it to verify. We are thinking to ourselves and always questioning the things that we see. So let's pop in to look at ChatGPT or ChatGPT Plus. I'll just start by sharing that screen. So as you all probably know, but just to introduce in case you haven't, this is the web interface that we normally see for OpenAI. If you don't see something that looks like this, let me quickly tell you how that you may get there. Here I'm at chat.openai.com. What I have is an account, and you can go to OpenAI's website and create an account if you want to. You may end up in a situation that looks kind of like this. If you want access to ChatGPT Plus, so for example, if you have only ChatGPT, if you want to go to the Plus, you have to upgrade to a subscription, which is called ChatGPT Plus, and it gives you access to things like plugins and advanced data analysis. So if you currently have ChatGPT Plus and you don't see these things, I'm just going to quickly walk through how you can get there. So first, you're going to come down here and you're going to go to the dots, and then you're going to go to settings and beta. And here, what you have is data controls. So we're going to go there. To have access to the plugins and to advanced data analytics, you will have to enable chat history and training. So these things will be used again for potentially training. So you have to be very, very careful and judicious about what you upload to the system. And generally, you should always be judicious if you have sensitive data, but you have to be especially judicious here because your data or your chats, they may be used as training data. So enable this. Let's see, the next thing is you will need to turn on the ability to access the plugins. And if you were talking to me, I just realized that my sound was muted. So please feel free to say anything if you need to interrupt or have a question or you have an answer. So you'll need to enable these plugins and also enable advanced data analysis. Again, that's what we're talking about today. So definitely we need to use that. So again, enable this, chat history and training, and the beta features of plugins and advanced data analysis. And all of this is available if you have ChatGPT Plus. So again, as you can see over here, we're at GPT-4 through ChatGPT Plus. And what we can do is now go down to advanced data analysis, and we'll click on it. And so it will then be checked. And at that point, we will know that we are using advanced data analysis. Now, something to look at here is this one has a plus, which advanced data analysis. So let's roll back to just GPT-4 and just see what's going on. So let me first ask you, and good thing that I just turned my sound on, I wanted to ask you, how many of you, and you can use the, let's see, the reactions. I think there's reactions at the bottom of this. Yes, the reactions bar. If you have used GPT 3.5 or GPT-4 to help you with coding. So thumbs up if you have used it to help you with any kind of programming, even if it's not data analysis. All right, so we got some people. Yeah, so we have a good percentage of people who have used it just for coding. All right, so of the folks that have used it for coding, how many of you have attempted to try to do data analysis? So not that you potentially would be uploading the data, but you ask about potential ways or code to create plots or things like that. How many of you have tried to use it for data analysis? And this is just GPT-4. or your ChatGPT, Bard, all of those. All right, great. So we have some people who have already tried it. So in thinking about GPT-4, maybe some of those people will be comfortable unmuting or let me open the chat so I can make sure I can read your answers. Tell us about that experience. What made it hard to use or suboptimal, and what were some components of it that made it really helpful? And you can feel free to unmute or just put it in the chat.
Hi, this is Yakima Crystal with Pediatric Endocrinology. I've used the data analysis tool, not with coding, but just importing an Excel file and asking it to give me a bar graph, a line graph to find, explain data trends or what are some unusual things about this data. And that's been extremely helpful, particularly for some of the Excel functions that you'd normally need to do like a pivot table for. You can simply just ask it to give you that information and it'll render it for you in graphical form.
I definitely agree. So advanced data analysis there is really great when you are needing to upload data, but also we can upload data a bit through GPT-4 if we're using CSV files, so we can like copy and paste the entire CSV or a subset of the CSV into GPT-4 and then ask it questions about that data, at which point that it can give us code to produce these line plots or bar plots or visualizations, and it can explain what it's doing. Fantastic. Other thoughts? Thank you for that, Dr. Young. Other thoughts? Oh, I see an answer in the chat. Yeah, so we like that we're able to see the code behind each prompt. So whenever we go to ask it about something or we want it to create that bar plot or that line plot or that box plot, then it's actually writing the code for us. We can look at it with our eyeballs. We can copy it. We can paste it into somewhere else. So something that's actually running like Python or R and actually see how it works in our own code. Let's see. Someone used ChatGPT 3.5 without Plus, and it gave some code options, but it wasn't, overly successful. Maybe it was a little bit questionable in its usage. Yeah, 3.5 can also be a little bit of a challenge. 4 is absolutely fantastic. So it is a little bit more helpful in terms of what we discussed. So in creating that code and giving these good explanations, but also, again, we are always thinking critically about what it's saying to us. We're leveraging the backgrounds that we have in terms of things that we've learned, our critical thinking skills, our problem-solving skills, and we're always thinking about what it says to us. Fantastic. So something interesting about that is that we kind of said that we might be able to copy and paste a CSV file in here, and then maybe ask it some questions about creating some plots, and it'll also do some explanations about that. It'll explain sort of how the data is behaving. And then when we actually want to try this on our own data, what we have to do is copy and paste that entire set of code, put it in whatever software we're using. So maybe we're using Jupyter Notebooks, maybe we're using R. We have to copy and paste it in there, and then we have to run it there. So what happens if you tried that approach, what happens if you try the code or you get the code from GPT-4, you copy it, you paste it in this other development environment like R or Python, and then you get an error? What then? How do you solve that? And again, feel free to unmute or just stick it in the chat. So someone said you paste in the error message. So that is precisely what most people do. And I think that's really just how many people work with it. So if you run the code that GPT-4 gives you, it may work correctly, it may work incorrectly, it may have syntactic or like execution like errors, or it may have these more semantic like errors where the code runs, but when you look at the results, they're not what you expect. So when it gives you these errors that are like runtime errors, key errors, things like that, you ask it what the error is, you can paste in that error message. So you come back, you paste it in here, and then you ask it to iterate on that code. So I have definitely done that as well. That is like the usual workflow that I'm using if I'm using this interface. So now let's talk about then advanced data analysis and how it differs from GPT-4. Okay, So again, something that we see and looking back and forth from GPT-4 is one, we have this plus right here. So this plus actually allows you to upload actual files. So you can upload your own CSV files, you can upload zip files that it will try to unzip, and it will use that in the computation, okay? So that's number one, we can upload files and we can ask things specifically about those data files. Another nice thing about advanced data analytics that we will see is that it overcomes this need to go back and forth with the copying and pasting. So whenever you think about advanced data analytics, it's not just something that gives you the code. So it does give you the code, but then it takes this next step and it actually runs the code in its own background kernel. It evaluates it to see if it did something correctly or if it gets that error message. And if it does, it actually takes action to correct those errors. So we have a collaborator named Jules White, and he has a really great explanation of how it works. But I tend to think about it, as whenever I'm building something sometimes, am I the greatest, crafts person? No. And so I tend to have a lot of different like screwdrivers, and it seems like every screw needs like a different screwdriver for whatever reason. And using GPT-4, let's say I'm trying to screw something in, I might go and I might grab some size screwdriver and try and screw it in, and I'll notice that it's not fitting. And at that point, I would say, okay, it's not fitting. So GPT-4 can get this other tool and tell you it's what it's need. Then you have to go and get the screwdriver and try and turn it, come back to GPT-4 and tell it, okay, that's not working. With advanced data analytics, it does the same thing as GPT-4, except when it sees that it cannot screw in that screw using a screwdriver of that size, it instead goes back, it gets a different screwdriver, and it tries that screwdriver, a smaller screwdriver or a bigger screwdriver. And it does that until it can finally screw in that screw. So it's not where you have to go back and forth in these different platforms and copy and paste here and copy and paste there. No, within this platform, it looks at its own errors, it evaluates its own code, it looks at sizes of data, it looks at the things that it performs, and it tries to make sure that it's doing the right thing. Also, you can help it along with this. So let's take an example of this. So let's assume that maybe we have done or are thinking about doing this analysis on transportation data or attitudes towards transportation in Nashville. And so let's say that maybe we get together with our expert survey creators and we come up with this survey. So we make this survey publicly available. We have these questions that are, demographics, things about the household children, income, how much the house that you live in or where you rent, how much you pay for it, how you are employed, the manner of working, whether you commute or whether it's hybrid, how you commute, and how you feel about that commute in Nashville. So let's say that this is actually the survey that we give. So we put this up through a Google survey and we leave it up for 2 months, for example. So here are the different questions that we may decide to have. And then of course, we would expect to have respondents, right? So we would have these respondents. So as you know, with these Google surveys, essentially what happens is you go and you look at the Excel. So you download as an Excel file. And let's say that we've done that. So here, this is just some code because anyway, it's a long story. But this is what we might have as our responses. And let's say that we collected 75 responses over 30 different questions. And this is what we might see. So this looks like normal survey stuff. Age, gender identity, all the questions that we have. We also see, just like normal surveys, we have these NANs. And also there are a few fields in here that are actually free response. Okay, so this is our data. And we know what the questions are that we want to ask about this data, but maybe we don't know how to phrase it in terms of Python code or in terms of R code. But we do have the words that we have to express what it is that we want. And as we know, with ChatGPT, GPT-4, Advanced Data Analytics, the coding language is natural language. So then we can actually do our coding and our analysis in this natural language. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how that can work. And I'm just going to walk you through an example. Ooh. And does someone have a question? All right, so let's go back to the beginning. So here you can see that one of the things that we did is we leveraged this ability to upload information. Okay, so we click this plus, and essentially what we did is we uploaded our survey. This survey info essentially has the text of the survey, and it has the data that we were just looking at. And then this is the prompt. And so this is something that I found that is really great in terms of getting better responses out of any generative AI. Usually, if you provided additional context about the expertise level or what you are looking for and where you're coming from, your own background, also the background about the thing that you're trying to do, it helps it to produce results that are more along what you're thinking. And why is that? Because it knows it's understanding better about where you're coming from. So I'm just saying I'm a sociology researcher studying attitudes and feelings towards transportation in and around Nashville. I told it what the data is and that I want to draw some insights, and I'll be reporting those to the city council. Then I said that, you know, here's the zip file, and one of my main things that I want is to make sure that the data is valid. So just from this, we have learned that we can upload data like directly, and also is really helpful to provide specific information to the generative AI to help it like formulate its responses better. So now you see some things. Number one, first, it is analyzing this. So first we see the steps, the logic that it's taking in order to come to the results. So first, it is extracting the zip file. It is looking at those files and reading them, and it's telling us what those extracted files are. This is something that even in coursework, we try to teach that once you do something, you should look at the result and see if it makes sense. So if we uploaded 10 files in the zip file and only came back with these 2, at that point, we would want to take some sort of intervention in this moment because we know that there should be 10 files in there. However, we know that there are 2 files, so now we can move on. And you can see here the power of what it's doing. One, if we're pretty unfamiliar with coding or how to do data analysis, we've already learned something, which is we need to unzip the zip file and load them. Wonderful. Then I asked it about the validity of the data. And now that is what it's about to do. So it asked me, so it's almost motivating the actual analysis that we're going to do. And so it asked me whether I would like to look at the survey text. It would have been better had I said yes, or whether we should proceed to loading the data and checking the validity of the data. And so I said, okay, let's just check the validity. So then it begins to do check the validity. So then it begins to do that. And now it's taking you through an actually very standard sort of data science workflow. So one, it tells us about the data. So it's telling us about the columns and its content. We can confirm this for ourselves as well, because that's what we would expect to be in it. We literally just looked at the data. And then it goes through these data science traditional analysis steps of looking at the content of the data in terms of missing values, summary statistics, and unique values. And so this is a very standard set of steps, but it does this and it volunteers this on its own so that you can go through it. So first, it's going to start doing all of these things. This is a moment in which sometimes your expertise about what you are doing needs to come in. The generative AI does not have every piece of information. It is not an expert. You are the expert. So because there's something that we know about public surveys, depending how we protect that link, sometimes you just get all these spam responses. Like there is some of the data that's really good in theory that you look at and you're like, okay, this makes sense. And then some of them just look sort of crazy and they're like really repetitive and quickly repeating. And we think, you know, no one could respond that quickly and it seems like the same values. So one thing that we like to do with data that's collected like sort of publicly through these electronic surveys is to make sure that things aren't spam. Something to look at though, is that when it's thinking about the validity of the data, it's only thinking about these things. As a researcher, and if you're someone who works with public surveys, this is something that would be at the forefront of your mind. And this is where your expertise comes in, that you need to be able to like think of what you need for your problem that it is not covering. So this is a human moment where you're injecting your expertise to guide it in the correct direction. So it takes that guidance, again, it has that instructional training, and now it moves on towards adding that to its list of things that it wants to do. Those are the 3 things that we saw before. But then it goes and says, all right, well, I'll check for these spam responses. Maybe for us, we don't really know what a spam response looks like, but it has some ideas about how it's going to look at the data and identify spam responses. So again, this is really helpful in case we know that there's spam, but we might not know how to find that spam. And so now it's actually educating us on how spam looks. This is like completely valid, where you have lots of missing values in that row, or you have things that are like submitted really, really quickly with very small differences in time, or they just have like crazy talk in the free response fields. So this is also an educational moment, helping us to understand what it is doing as it's trying to help us to find those spam responses. So now we just continue right on. And so now it's telling us a little bit more. All we literally had to do was write, yes, let's proceed with this plan. So here it's telling us about these missing values. Here it's actually, this is a moment in which we might want to actually interrogate a little bit further. We see that it has missing values in a lot of columns, but we might want to know a little bit more information about that depending on our analysis. And we could also absolutely ask that even at this point, because here is going to give us the opportunity to respond. So just moving forward, we have, we know that we do have missing values, and now it's going to start to generate the summary statistics. It's going to do the numerical columns, which we can see here. Something, again, that is going on as human beings that we should be thinking of is that zip code is not really a numerical column. Like, is it numbers? Yes. But there's not as such, like even this line, the average zip code is approximately 370.48.7. Like that's like a nonsensical statement. So what we would be instead looking for is something closer to like the mode. And this is where we need to inject our expertise as human beings, where we would want to correct it here. So I just left this, but I think this is a great thing to see about generative AI. It is not, sometimes it is not looking at things at the depth that we are. It sees a number, but we see a zip code, and we know that the mean of a zip code is just, it doesn't make any sense. It also doesn't really make sense to have a minimum or maximum zip code unless you're looking in a particular range. But this is something that in our minds, we would say, hey, actually, that's not really a numerical column, but instead compute the mode or something like that. Then another common data science step that is taking you through the categorical columns. And keep in mind, all I'm saying is yes. Like, I'm not telling it to do those things. All I said was that, hey, I think there's spam. And then it looked for the spam, and then now it's doing this. Actually, it will look for the spam soon. So now it's looking at the categorical values. And here it's looking at these, and now it also begins to notice the spam. It's possible that it might have noticed the spam without me saying anything. And so now it's going to educate us on how it will go after identifying potential spam responses. And again, this is nothing that I explicitly told it to do. Maybe I don't actually know how to compute spam responses, but this is what it's going to do to help to identify those. So yes, let's proceed with that step. I here give it additional instruction because this is what, in data analysis you might do. So you might want to separate the true data from the spam data and analyze them separately, or not even analyze the spam to the extent that you see that it is spam. So here we see that we want to continue our analysis on the true data, and we're again giving instructions about reporting the findings about the spam and the true data. So here it goes. Now it's telling us about how it's identifying the spam and also its findings. So it says that there are 50 responses that are true data, and there's 25 that are spam. And this is actually correct. That's exactly what the data is. So again, we have been kind of skipping over these lines that say finish working and show work. But if we click on these, this is where you actually see the analysis being done. Okay, so this one is saying these are the steps. It's in Python. You can copy this code. Again, this is a moment where you can copy and paste if you wanted to, but we'll see in a moment that that's not exactly necessary. So here It is identifying some spam responses. You can see that it's like looking for these very specific things. It's also looking for these high missing values, everything that it said. And so in looking at this, we might think to ourselves, this is a really great approach. We're going to go with it. Maybe if you have a little bit more expertise in spam responses, these right here might be triggers, like you might need to expand that dictionary of information. But again, we as human beings, we can look at this, potentially even without training, we can look at this and say, all right, that's not the total expanse of the weird strings that we would expect to see. So we might take a more robust approach there, which we can also ask Code Interpreter to do. So now this is another step that is unique to advanced data analytics. And sorry, you're going to hear me say Code Interpreter because that's what it used to be called. But I mean the same thing. Code Interpreter is advanced data analytics. So now this is something that is really nice. So let's say that you get through all that and maybe all you really wanted was the spam versus the not spam. We can ask to have those data sets downloadable for us. So here we're actually able to, like, it's a link that we can click. Oh, sorry, I expired here. But we could click here and actually download this true data. We could download the spam data as two separate CSVs. And we could download them and then continue doing whatever analysis that we want. Even further, since we have this code, again, we have this moment of reproducibility, where once we have this code, we can just run straight through it and make sure we get the same result. We can also go between these code chunks and make sure and write tests or assertions about what we want, what we would expect to be true. So here you see something nice, which is, again, that it's telling us about things. It's telling us about the irregularities that it found about spam. Something here, again, because we're human beings, we might look at this. And at least for me, when I look at this with my eyeballs, it's just too much to look at. This is not something helpful for me to see. And so generally, I think as people, we tend to like to see visualizations that help us to understand a bunch of information more concisely. And again, that is something we can certainly ask for. So it prompts me that it wants to start, analyzing the true data. Again, it's going through a standard data analysis workflow, and we may not have really any deep understanding of what that looks like, but it's taking us through it. And so we're going to now begin to look at the true data. And I said, hey, look, I can't read that. That's not going to make any sense to me. So let's just go ahead and get some visualizations, okay? And it says, all right, we'll definitely do that. So now it starts doing sorts of standard data analysis. This would be something like exploratory data analysis, where we're trying where we're trying to better understand the visual distribution of the data to, again, confirm that what we expect to be true is true, and just to better understand our data. So as it says, it is showing some demographic details here, and it is making these really, actually pretty good looking plots. So here we can see about the age distribution, gender identity distribution, income distribution. This is like fantastic. It's really nice that it rotated those tick labels so we could read them a little bit better. Sometimes it takes a really long time just to figure out how to rotate a tick label depending what package you're in. And so it did just a really great job of creating these. And so when we get to this, so this is a little bit, so this is something that is really sort of odd. We may ask it to make a different visualization than this because it's again, just a little bit, it's just nonsensical. This would probably be better as something like a leaflet plot of something that's like geographical. But here it also actually comments on what it sees or what it understands about the data. This is also a moment where you definitely, with your human eyeballs, you want to look at the data and make sure it matches what Code Interpreter is saying. So for example, it says the age distribution appears to be quite balanced with a substantial number of responses from different age groups. This is the distribution. Not quite sure if I would say that that is balanced. And so again, as human beings, we are the ones who are responsible for this analysis and commenting and having the final word on it. Even though Code Interpreter is trying to tell you that this is balanced, in our opinion, that's may not be balanced, even though these counts are relatively small. It's Okay, though, it's arguable. Then it's saying about gender identity that it's making some statements about the majority respondents as male or female. Here we see that that's again, like it's not true. Maybe if you add them together, then it's true. But here, this is actually like the majority. So just be careful in the way that you kind of are interpreting what it says, and go back and actually verify the kind of analysis and the analytical statements that it's making. Again, this is a wonderful moment. Sometimes plotting can be just weirdly difficult. It's just difficult. And so here, this actually provides us a good bit of plotting code. So again, if we have new data or we want to run this again, then we can just run it using this code. And it provides us, again, some really nice formatting in terms of telling us about the different areas of the code, and also what they're doing. And so if the case is, like, even at this moment that you look at this code and you're like, actually, I want a little bit more detail, because we are using just natural language, that is something that we can definitely ask. So here, it's again taking me further through the data science workflow. It's asking me whether I want to know more about the transportation habits and preferences. Likely the reason being that at the very beginning of this entire conversation, I said that I was interested in the attitudes towards transportation about people in Nashville. So of course it went straight to picking this out. So here it's telling us what it's going to analyze, the columns that you might be interested in. And it's sticking again with these visualizations because I said I like visualizations. So here you can see these visualizations. I think these are pretty rock solid in terms of explaining things even to potentially council members. And it's just, I think these are really helpful, again, in terms of the code. It provides that to us as well. So those are the things that it sort of guided me through on its own. Then it asked me, is there anything else I want to see about that or anything else in general? So then, as you know, again, we are researchers, we're students, we have questions. We look at the data and we're curious. There's certain things that we want to know. And so we are not limited to just like a standard sort of top level data analysis where it's just going to give us like distributions, mean, median, standard deviation, those kinds of things. We can actually ask real questions about the data, and we can propose it in the way that we would say it. So here I am trying to gain more insight on the differences in commute times based on the primary modes of transportation. So maybe people who are in cars or like go to work in cars actually have the same commute time as people who are on public transportation. Don't know, but I want to see it together, and I want it to be concise, clear, aesthetically pleasing, and understood by a layperson. So let's see if what it came up with is something that is making sense, and we'll see if you agree with the way that it's shown things. So it's saying that it wants to create this horizontal bar plot, and it's explaining what the axes on these plots will be and what the colors will be. And in looking at this, this is what it came up with. So let's take a moment and look at this. What are y'all's thoughts about this? We wanted to understand whether commute times were influenced by the mode of transportation. Do you feel like this visualization is aesthetically pleasing? Does it get the point across? Or what do you understand from it? What are your thoughts? Okay, we have an answer. Someone said the distribution plots are similar to the plots they developed in their machine learning class. Awesome. Well, that's good to hear. The sorting of responses doesn't really work. So can you clarify what you mean by that a little bit?
Sorry, I'll come off mute. I think they should be sorted by amount of time and then a color gradient so that the longer amounts of time have a darker color so that you can kind of look at it and see how much time without having to really reference the legend so much.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I think that makes sense as well. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I like the way that you're explaining that. Something that's nice is that people who are, have a lot of insight when it comes to visualization, and researchers that normally report these sorts of things, instead of having to write all the minutia of the code to make that happen. So this could be considered the baseline of what needs to be plotted. Instead of having to write all this from scratch, you can start off with this as the template, or with natural language and your expertise, you can convey or type in natural language to advanced data analytics how you want to see this changed. And something I think that is nice about this plot is that, one, it shows us something. So we are not going through this essentially like this index of these different types of plots that are like 100 or so different kinds of plots that you can make, and we're not trying to find one. We could also ask for like a sampling of different kinds of plots. We can ask it to show us several, and we can choose from them. And then we can also have it change these plots based on expertise like the one that like what you've said. So I definitely agree there. I think it's a great starting point. I actually think it's quite aesthetically pleasing though. All right, so here we're at the end, and actually I wanted to continue on this conversation with it, but it timed out. So one thing about advanced data analytics, but also actually no, that might be true. But because advanced data analysis / code interpreter, because it is running like this, so it has this like storage associated with it, which would allow us to download. Because it has that, as well as the sort of runtime that it's on, it is something that does expire. So after like our time times out, and I'm not quite sure about what that timing is, then we can't kind of go back in and continue the conversation. So this is one way in which advanced data analytics really empowers anyone to do analysis on their data. Why is that? Because it is going to allow us to upload our data if we're able to. Again, be careful with your sensitive data and be careful about any data you don't want trained on. But otherwise, we're able to upload the data. Generally, we're able to interact with it in natural language. It will take us on a standard data science journey and do most of the standard analytics with us. And we can also inject our expertise and guide it towards what we actually want. So this is very empowering, especially if people are not like writing code all the time, but you know what analysis looks like and you know what needs to be done, but maybe the writing of the code isn't there. This is perfect for people that are in that position. So this is one of the ways that I like to use advanced data analytics, but in truth, there is a second way that I use it much more. And that is because of what we just said about sensitive data. So I absolutely love analytics like this. I like that it forms like a really solid baseline for me to start with, just get the basics out the way. And then if I have additional things that I want to do, I can extend it if I want to. But we can't upload patient data to this, never. We can't upload student data to this, never. There are certain things that we will just never be uploading on a site like this, or in general to anything like this. But what we could upload is a synthetic data set that we create, right? And so we can have that synthetic data set have the distribution of our actual data set, or we can take a lot of different steps so we can get this synthetic data set that has numbers or is representative, and we can upload that to advanced data analytics and then start using that for our analysis. After we do that analysis there, we then get the notebook, and since we have the data, we can then run the notebook on our real data locally. So let me show you an example though of how one can go about generating this data. And so actually the data that we were just looking at, yeah, I just definitely, I definitely created that. And so you can see here, again, it really helps to have this thing called a persona. Although use it with caution, it helps to have a persona and describe really what you're after and what you're looking for. So this is precisely like what we just talked about. And so here, that survey that you just saw, it pretty much designed it. I said that I wanted a few specific things, but then I told it, hey, like you're the expert, add in what you think it is. Some other questions that you think are good. And it added in some other additional questions. Then I thought of some more questions and I told it to add them in, and it added them right on in. And then again, we have the ability to download that survey. It allowed me to download it as a text file. Then I know that lots of data has spam in it, something that we have unfortunately experienced. And so again, download. And then here is the spam that we injected, and that's why it had it 100% correct. And then we mix them together for a full data set. So if you teach courses and you're having trouble like getting a data set, but you have a data set in your mind that you know that you could create, this is so helpful in generating those data sets that are of a particular size, have a particular composition. You can add NAs. It's really, really helpful in terms of quickly coming up with data sets, particularly ones that would take you just like an unreal amount of time to create. So for example, I created a data set the other day that was a bunch of like titles of different books. And so it was making up these titles of different books. And out of my brain, it would be really hard for me to like generate that like 100 or 150 of them, and yet advanced data analytics, they can come up that in a snap. So the last part of this that I also think is fantastic, beyond the ability to actually download the data, is the fact that we actually do not have to do all of that copying and pasting into another platform. So here I said that I want to download this code and any relevant commentary as a Jupyter notebook. And if you use Python and you do data science, Jupyter Notebook is like a very standard data data format, and it's like an integrated development environment. Here you see it trying to do it. It tries to do it, and again, it's self-correcting, seeing that it failed. It tells you, yeah, I messed that up a little bit. Let me try it again. The second time it does it, it creates it successfully. And here you can see that there, and we're able to actually download that Jupyter Notebook. And it's also a functional Jupyter Notebook. So as you know, Jupyter Notebooks are a bunch of JSON, and so they're really easy to, like a little comma and your whole notebook is off. But this was actually a valid Jupyter Notebook that we could use to replicate or run again this entire analysis pipeline. So again, what you have with advanced data analytics is the ability to create a synthetic data set according to the specifications that you want. You can add in NAs, you can add in incorrect values, you can put in like things that you encounter in real life, like, I don't know, some parts that are just like unreadable. You can create all of those things, or you can use your own data in the case that you can actually upload it somewhere. We can upload all of that data. We can let it run us through a standard analysis pipeline. We can, again, intervene, tell it exactly what we want, ask direct research questions, direct its path in the analysis, and at the very end, we can download the entire thing as a Jupyter Notebook and run that analysis as many times as we want to on as many different data sets as we want. And that is some of the power of Code Interpreter. It is really helpful, especially if you teach classes and you need to make data sets. I see a question in the chat. It says, I noticed the code produced is in Python. Can we translate code to from other programs, for example, R? So currently with advanced data analytics, the primary language is Python. But do keep in mind that there are other generative AI platforms that are great for actually doing a translation like that. So for example, let's say you get this Jupyter Notebook file out, or you decide to get it as a big old long Python script. What you can do is you could copy and paste that, and then you can put it into GPT-4 and have it translate over to R. All right, I see some really good questions. Let me stop sharing. And please feel free to answer questions or ask questions. Thank you for being here. And that's all I really had for today, but now I am very excited to answer your questions. And so I see some in the chat, and I'm going to start with those. Have you seen a functional limit to the size of the data sets you can work with? I personally have not yet seen that, but it seems like that is something that would exist. Maybe we can look more in the documentation, or talk with Jesse Spencer-Smith, who may have more of a beat on that. Could it identify common themes and free text responses? So that is an exceptional question. This is something that I tried on my own as well. I did notice that it was pretty rock solid in doing like sentiment type analysis. And so it can read different statements and kind of give you a gauge on whether they're like praise or positive or angry or what have you. In terms of themes, it will try it has the capacity to do some pretty complex algorithms. I think the other day I saw it do, I don't know, it was something like image space or something. And so it can do some pretty complex analyses, but when you get to things that are more advanced, you might have to like help it a little bit more. So that might be a time where you have to kind of, I don't know, like help it with GPT-4 as well, or something like Claude or Bard, to try to move it along in terms of giving it more information. So something that I can comment on from that same perspective is that the other day I was trying to get it again to create a data set. I just do that all the time. So I was creating this data set, and it was just getting stuck over and over and over. So you remember how we said that it will try something, it'll notice that it did it wrong, it'll go to try doing something else, and it'll notice that it did that wrong. Sometimes it can get in these loops where it's just like trying and like doing the wrong thing and trying and doing the wrong thing. You don't necessarily need to interrupt it. It always comes to those points eventually where it's like, would you like to proceed? And so those are the times where you can inject your additional knowledge about just coding or whatever you know about analysis. So when it gets in those loops, I tend to ask it about mid types of results. So it was trying to create like these data frames and was creating these lists. And I was saying, like, every time you create something, print the length of that thing, print the shape of it. And because of those extra steps that it had to take with creating the lengths and things like that, it was able to identify its mistake, because it was like, oh yeah, this thing over here is 35, it should be 49, I need to go back and do this. And so it finally got out of that like sort of failing loop, because, you know, we inserted common debugging activities to its set of steps that it's going to take. So very long answer, but it does have the ability to use algorithms to identify common themes and free text responses. But the more complex the data is, or more complex the technique is that you want to use, you may have to intervene to help it more than with the things that we've seen with analytics. Other questions?
So one of the things I've noticed that you can do is you can also use like the Wolfram Alpha plugin to get some visualizations of data. Do you have an opinion about when it is useful to go down that route versus the advanced data analytics?
I think with Wolfram Alpha, it is better when there's like more complexity to what you're asking mathematically. I did notice with advanced data analytics that it still kind of does struggle with some mathematical things sometimes, especially if it's like sort of arithmetic-y. And so if anything is like very deep into like the mathematics, or you're trying to, I don't know, do like some circuit analysis or something that's like very deep in the mathematics, then it might be better to go that way with Wolfram Alpha, that is just so capable in those areas. That's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming today. I'm going to release you back for 4 minutes of time before probably your next meeting, but thanks again for